Did you know that one of the most elite fighter jets ever built ended up in the scrapyard? Why do you think that is? Because sometimes during evaluations, they fell behind their competitors. Other times, bad luck, bribery, or behind-the-scenes games meant they never made it into service. So even if the technology is superior, it's not always enough. Capital, time, and politics all play a crucial role in getting a military fighter jet into service. Today, we're going to hear the stories of military aircraft that almost turned the world upside down and could have changed the course of wars. Fighter jets that, because of politics, money, or just bad luck, never got the chance to serve. Before this video, we also released another one on the channel where we talked about 5 incredible military aircraft. Now, let's take a closer look at 5 more of these truly tempting machines that unfortunately never made it to operational squadrons. Imagine having a fighter jet with the power of an F-16, but with lower costs and easier maintenance. On top of that, it can fire Spiral and AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, 82 Malawian Quachas bombs, as well as 20mm and 30mm rockets and cannons. This is where Northrop proudly unveiled the F20 Tigershark, a compact, lightweight, multi-role aircraft that could reach speeds of about Mach 2 or 2,400 kilometers per hour. This fighter was developed from the F5E Tiger II and was designed for the US export market. However, despite how incredible this project was, it quietly faded away. Why? Because the US Air Force didn't accept it, and at that time, the F-16 was already being used by the USAF and the US Navy. So other countries said, if America itself doesn't want it, why should we buy it? Maybe the F-20 just couldn't complement the F-16. So Northrop, which had invested $1 to $2 billion in this fighter jet, decided to cancel the project due to the limited market. In total, only 3 prototypes of the F-20 were ever built. One of them is on display at the California Aerospace Museum. The other 2 crashed, but these crashes were due to the pilots blacking out, not because of any design flaw. That was probably because of its extremely high speed. Now let's move on to a fascinating French aircraft that, frankly, nobody really cared about. It's a delta-wing plane called the Mirage 4000, which was designed as a follow-up to the Mirage 2000. Only a single prototype of this aircraft was ever built, and it completed a total of 336 test flights, with its maiden flight taking place on January 8, 1988. The Mirage 4000, with its carbon composite wings featuring internal fuel tanks, was considered an unprecedented innovation. It was also equipped with 2 Snecma M53-2 engines, each providing 95 kilonewtons of thrust. Known for its high speed and excellent maneuverability, on its 6th flight, it reached 15 kilometers in under 4 minutes at twice the speed of sound. Could also carry 3 times more than the Mirage 2000. It was equipped with external fuel tanks and had aerial refueling capability. In addition, it had the capacity to carry 8 tons of weapons, including air-to-air missiles, bombs, rockets, and 2 30mm giant defense cannons. But with all these features, why wasn't it ever put into production? Well, quite simply, it was because it didn't find any particular buyers. There were no domestic orders, and even the French Air Force preferred the Mirage 2000 and didn't place any orders for the Mirage 4000. On the other hand, with the fall of the Shah's regime in Iran and the victory of the revolution, potential buyers like Iran and Saudi Arabia were also out of the picture. In fact, Saudi Arabia chose the Tornado and the F-15. Nevertheless, the technology of the Mirage 4000 was eventually transferred to the Rafale project, and helicopters like the Rafale B-30 and E also have their roots in Mirage 4000 technology. The prototype of the Mirage 4000 was put on display at the Aerospace Museum at the historic Le Bourget Airport in the northeast of Paris. Now, let's move on to number 3 on our list. In the 1980s, Israel was facing severe regional threats. On one hand, countries like Syria and Iraq, backed by the Soviet Union, were busy strengthening their air forces. And on the other hand, Israel was relying on fighter jets that were either American or outdated. It was under these circumstances that the authorities decided and said, we have to build a fighter jet ourselves, something on par with the F-16, but domestically made and tailored to Israel's exact needs. So, A fighter jet called the IAI Lavi was built, which was even better than the F-16 in some respects. For example, the Lavi's aerodynamic design was more modern, which gave the jet exceptional agility and better maneuverability. It also featured an advanced digital flight control system, composite materials, a lighter airframe, and a glass cockpit with multifunction displays. But the United States got scared of this project. Why do you think that was? Because the Lavy would become a direct export competitor to American fighter jets, so political and economic pressure began. On the other hand, this project was extremely expensive and even became controversial among the Israeli public. But in the end, in 1987, right in the middle of the flight testing phase, the Israeli government canceled the project. An entire and significant aviation industry was utterly destroyed. Nevertheless, the IAI Lavi fighter was a truly remarkable aircraft that, had it actually taken to the skies, might have profoundly changed the entire balance of power in the Middle East and even the global military aircraft market, forever altering its landscape. Now, let's move on to a truly remarkable and incredibly powerful flying super beast called the XB70 Valkyrie, an American supersonic strategic bomber and a colossal six-engine giant that looked far more like a futuristic spaceship from the realm of science fiction than a real, conventional airplane. This bomber could fly at Mach 3, which is 3,200 kilometers per hour, at an altitude of 70,000 feet. That's about 21 kilometers up. One of its strangest features was its wings, which would bend and tilt downward at high speeds to improve flight stability. The idea was that this bomber would be so fast that no missile or fighter jet could catch it. This idea made sense in 1955, but by the time the project was halfway through, the Soviets had built more powerful surface-to-air missiles like the SA-2, which could shoot down this bomber at high altitudes no matter how fast it was going. So the strategy changed. They had to use bombers like the B-1 and B-2, which flew at low altitudes and were both stealthy and radar evading. On the other hand, building the XB70 Valkyrie was extremely expensive, but it didn't really offer any operational advantage. In addition, the US shifted its focus to intercontinental ballistic missiles. As a result, the project was gradually halted. Only one or two prototypes were built, which flew as research aircraft until 1969. It's worth noting that in 1969, one of these two bombers was destroyed, and now the only remaining example is kept at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. But let's move on to the very last item. Imagine a truly remarkable fighter jet that can effortlessly fly at incredible speeds over Mach 3.3. That's approximately 3,540 kilometers per hour, or 2,200 miles per hour. It can outrun most missiles, and it can fly at extreme altitudes where there's barely enough oxygen for human beings to survive. This isn't just a legend. The Lockheed YF12 was actually built, but like many other ambitious projects, it only lasted for a short time. In fact, this jet was a supersonic interceptor equipped with two Pratt and Whitney J58 turbojet engines. But what made the YF12 special was that it wasn't just designed to identify targets. It could actually fire at them too. That means the YF12 would first detect targets up to 800 kilometers away with a powerful radar, and then it would fire at them. This fighter was equipped with 3 AIM-47 Falcon missiles, each of which could reach speeds close to Mach 4. Even so, although 3 YF-12s were built and their tests were successful, there were several reasons that led to the early demise of this project. For example, budget shortages due to the Vietnam War and changes in defense doctrine. In other words, the Air Force shifted its focus from interception with aircraft to defense with radar and defensive missiles, because missiles were faster and cheaper. You should know that until 1979, the YF-12 was in active service with the Air Force Research Laboratory in NASA, and it was extensively used to meticulously study various supersonic phenomena, including extreme heat management techniques, high-altitude flight aerodynamics, and the performance of high-speed engines. Currently, one YF-12 is carefully preserved at the United States Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson AFB in Ohio. But if we want to be realistic, I think the YF-23 and the F20 Tigershark were among those projects that, if they had entered service, the skies would look very different today. What do you think? Which fighter do you think is more regrettable? If a country had only put one of these fighters into service, which one do you think would have been better? Leave a comment and tell us why. In short, if even just one of these aircrafts had been put into service, the Cold War or even the Gulf War might have turned out differently. But remember, not everything that flies high in the sky necessarily reaches its peak, because technical design alone doesn't guarantee the success of a military aircraft. It's actually a combination of advanced technology, political analysis, and costs that can determine the future of these projects. That's the lesson of this video. Behind every innovation, there's always a hidden story of rivalry, pride, and maybe even a missed opportunity.